Hello and welcome back to the journey through games. We've got a slightly different video today. I've finished going through all of the Super Nintendo games released in Europe and the US. So whoop whoop, that took a lot longer than I thought it would, but it's finally done. But having said that, there are some games that I intentionally missed out. Which is not great, and this video is really all about those games. So if you've watched any of my Super Nintendo videos, you'll know that I intentionally missed out most of the sports games because in general I have zero interest in sports games, but there are also some non-sports games that I just couldn't bring myself to play. So first off, let's have a look at some statistics. I went onto Wikipedia and had a look, and according to Wikipedia, there's a grand total of 1,738 Super Nintendo games released across all three regions. So that's PAL, NTSC, and NTSC-J, which is Japan. And then out of those games, 959 were Japanese exclusives, which I was quite surprised by, because it means that more than half of the Super Nintendo games ever made were only ever released in Japan, which is pretty surprising. And then looking at the other regions, so there's 106 games which were exclusive to the US and just 34 games that were PAL exclusive. And then looking at all three regions, there were 297 games that were released in all three territories. So if you take all of that into account, that gives us only a total of 1,396 games. And so the remaining games were released in a combination of two different territories. So for games released in both Japan and the US, the total was 146. For games released in Japan and PAL territories, the total was just 28. And then last but not least, games released in both the US and PAL territories, the total there was 168. So now if you add all of those figures together, you get to the grand total, which is 1,738 total Super Nintendo games ever released. And that's a lot of stats. So as I said in every video that I was doing as part of the journey through games, my intention was only ever to play the games that were released in Europe and the US. So that means there was only ever going to be a total of 779 games, because that covers the games that were released in all three regions, the NTSC exclusives, the PAL exclusives, games released in the US and Japan, games released in PAL regions and Japan, and then along with the games released in PAL regions and the US. And that's how I got to the 779. And of those 779, I identified 95 games that I put under the umbrella of absolutely zero interest in playing. I just couldn't bring myself to play them on stream. Most of them are sports games of one type or another, and I probably would have played them for about 60 seconds, and going through all the hoo-ha of setting up my streaming system, like all the stuff for streaming, and then getting bored after 60 seconds and going on to the next one. It just didn't really appeal to me, and I didn't want the journey through games to become torture, so I didn't do that.
Get to the point, I'm trying to tell you. Get to the point, what have you done?
So finally, we've got to the whole point of this video. I categorised the 95 games that I didn't play on stream, as you can see on screen. So the first category we're going to look at is the miscellaneous one. And in there, you've got games like Jeopardy, Deluxe, Jeopardy Sports, and Wheel of Fortune featuring Vanna White, whoever that is. They're all based on TV game shows. I played one Wheel of Fortune and one Jeopardy game, and that was enough for me. and those types of games are the very definition of, if you've played one, you've played them all. Also in that list was Miracle Piano, which I've looked at videos of. It's like an early attempt at a virtual piano tutor for the Super Nintendo, but it needs the piano peripheral, and I haven't got that, and I don't want it, so I've not played that game. The other ones in there are the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, so that's 2, 3, 4, and Nobunaga's Ambition, Lord of Darkness. They're all grand strategy games, and they are, in my opinion, completely impenetrable without the manuals. They're basically electronic board games, and if you've ever tried to figure out a board game without reading the rules, you'll know exactly what it's like trying to get into these games, and also why I wasn't going to put myself through that. If you do want to see me attempt to figure out a board game without the rules, you can look at my videos on Genghis Khan 2, Clan of the Grey Wolf, and Liberty or Death, which is a grand strategy game set during the American War for Independence. None of those games have like a tutorial. They just drop you straight in and you're expected to figure your way out. Needless to say, I didn't. Also in there you've got pinball games, Super Pinball, Behind the Mask, and Solitaire as well, which is a card game. I've never really been into pinball, so a Super Nintendo version was always going to be a hard sell. And I've played enough Solitaire on Windows XP that I don't need to play it on the Super Nintendo, so that's why I didn't have a look at those. And last up in the miscellaneous category, we've got Super Scope 6, as it's known in the USA, or Nintendo Scope 6 is what it's known as in Europe. This was the pack-in game that came with the Super Scope. A part of me thinks that I should play this because I've played all of the other Super Scope only games, but I had a quick look at some videos online and it really doesn't interest me. It's a pack-in game. Have a look online. If you really think, if you feel really strongly about me not playing it, leave a comment. So yeah, that covers all of the miscellaneous games, which only leaves the sports games, and this is real bottom of the barrel stuff, and these make up the majority of the games I didn't play for obvious reasons. Right then, so on to the sports games. I'm going to go through these games in the order of how many there were on the console. So starting with the sport which had the greatest representation on the Super Nintendo, which is obviously, as you could probably have guessed, football games. There are 24 football games on the Super Nintendo that I didn't play, and like with most sports games, I think once you've played one, you've pretty much played them all. And on top of that, I'm not really a huge football fan anyway, so there was no real incentive for me to play these 24 football games. I did play a few. You can have a look on the channel and see the ones I played, and I probably lasted about less than 5 minutes with each of them. So yeah, have a look. The next sport is American football. There's 20 American football games on the Super Nintendo. I didn't play any, and quite frankly, you couldn't pay me to play these. No offense to American football fans, but I have the least interest in the sport, and even less interest in playing a 16-bit game version of it. So I might have actually played. Did I play one American football game? I don't know, and I don't care enough to go and check. But if yeah, so I didn't play the 20 that are in this list. Baseball games. Now, baseball games can be fun. I played a few of them on the Journey Through games, but I just couldn't bring myself to play another 14. The one decent one that I did play was Nolan Ryan's Baseball. That stands out in my memory. That's a decent pick up and play baseball game. But the other 14, no interest. Ice hockey. Similar to baseball, ice hockey games can be good fun, but they're just so similar to each other, almost by definition, I guess, because they're all ice hockey games. I did enjoy Hit the Ice. That's my recommendation for a Super Nintendo ice hockey game, one that I did play. All the rest I just couldn't be bothered with. Basketball games. I do enjoy basketball games, and I played quite a lot of them during the Journey Through games. Like, if on the list I saw that there was a basketball game, I would play it rather than dumping it in the no interest category. But I do have a life and responsibilities outside of playing every Super Nintendo game. So these 11 basketball ones, they got the chop. I didn't play them. And last up, we've got the fishing games. So these can be interesting, especially I think if they lean a bit more into the arcadey side of things rather than going down the simulation route. At least that would be more interesting to me. I played a couple of them, and that was enough. So yeah, didn't really get into the fishing games. So there we have it, the 95 games that I intentionally didn't play as part of my journey through every Super Nintendo game released in Europe and the US. And kind of as an added bonus in this video, for the people who've stayed to the end, I thought I'd share my personal sports game hierarchy when it comes to sports games in general, not just for the Super Nintendo. Apologies again to American football fans, no hate, but I think most people outside the US would put it that low down. I think golf, tennis, racing, winter sports and boxing all kind of lend themselves to making pretty decent video games. If it's below them, then it's going to be a struggle personally to get me interested. I played the only cricket and the only rugby games on the Super Nintendo simply because they were the only ones on the console, which made them a little bit more interesting, but neither of them were very good in my opinion. In fact, I don't really think I could remember anything about either of them other than that they were a rugby game and a cricket game. So there we have it, a rambling video about why I didn't actually play every Super Nintendo game released in Europe and the US, and a bonus hierarchy that that offends most sports games fans. And also as well, there was some interesting statistics at the beginning, so hopefully you've learned something from this video. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.